In the early months of 2011, the Rives' home stood quietly at the edge of a residential cul-de-sac on the outskirts of Spokane, Washington. The house, modest yet well-kept, had beige siding and dark green shutters that framed its windows like watchful eyes. The lawn was always trimmed, the flower beds weeded, and the hedges along the fence line shaped with care. It was the kind of home that seemed to hum with the rhythm of quiet domestic life, the kind people passed by without ever suspecting anything unusual. Daniel Rives was a commercial pilot, often gone for days or even weeks at a time, flying across states and continents in the metallic belly of an airliner. Tall and reserved, he carried the calm demeanor of someone used to pressure and precision. His job demanded both, and he embraced the routine and responsibility it brought. Flying offered him control, a sense of purpose, and the means to provide everything he thought his wife needed. Vanessa, his wife of 6 years, stayed home. She was the kind of woman who moved quietly through her days, filling them with domestic rituals that bordered on the ceremonial. Mornings began with the scent of fresh coffee and the murmur of a local news broadcast. Afternoons passed in a soft rhythm of cleaning, cooking, and waiting. She filled the space in the house with candles, flowers, and carefully chosen furniture that gave their home a sense of calm permanence. Together, they painted a picture of a couple in harmony. They attended community events when Daniel was in town, hosted barbecues in the summer, exchanged small gifts on anniversaries, and never raised their voices in public. Friends described them as private, close-knit, maybe a bit too perfect. What they didn't see was the growing space between them, measured not just in flight schedules but in the kind of silence that lingers after unspoken disappointments. For 3 years, Vanessa and Daniel had been trying to start a family. At first, it had been a hopeful journey, carefully timed calendars, whispered conversations about baby names, and a spare room that Vanessa had already begun to decorate in pale yellows and soft grays. But each month brought only silence, and each year eroded a little more of that early optimism. Still, they never gave up. They told themselves it just hadn't happened yet. That it would. Eventually. When Daniel returned from trips, he brought her souvenirs from airport shops, scarves, perfume, books. She kept them all, lining the shelves in her dressing room like trophies of his devotion. His paychecks were generous, and Vanessa never wanted for anything material. Yet, despite their comforts, something in her remained quietly unsatisfied, something she herself didn't fully understand or speak of aloud. She loved her husband. She admired his discipline, his unwavering nature. But his absences made her feel suspended in time. Days blended into one another, marked only by weather and the hum of the washing machine. When he was home, life resumed its rhythm. When he was gone, the house echoed with routines that no longer felt anchored to anything real. From the outside, their marriage appeared sturdy, even enviable. But within the walls of that quiet house, cracks had begun to form, subtle, almost invisible, but real. They were both waiting for something, a child, a sign, a moment of change. And in that waiting, the foundation of their world began to shift, one silent breath at a time. The news came on a Wednesday morning, delivered in the sterile tones of a fertility specialist who had said similar things many times before. The words were clinical, but their weight settled into the room like a storm cloud. Daniel sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, absorbing the diagnosis with the stillness of someone accustomed to turbulence. Vanessa, beside him, stared at the floor, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and grief. The doctor continued speaking, but neither of them truly heard. All that mattered had already been said. Daniel could not have children. The ride home was silent. The air between them felt colder than the February wind outside. By the time they reached the house, it was clear that no conversation would mend what had unraveled in that moment. Daniel retreated to his study and packed for his next trip. Vanessa watched him from the doorway, wanting to reach out, but unable to find the words. That night, he left for another long-haul flight, and the house felt emptier than it ever had. In the days that followed, Vanessa moved through a fog. The house, once her sanctuary, had become a prison of quiet hallways and echoing disappointment. She stopped watering the plants. Dishes remained in the sink. The spare bedroom door, still painted in hopeful yellow, stayed shut. Time lost its shape, hours bled into one another, and the silence grew unbearable. On a Friday night, after ignoring several invitations, Vanessa finally accepted an offer from an old friend to join a small group at a local bar. She didn't dress up. She didn't intend to stay long. But as the music pulsed and laughter filled the corners of the dimly lit room, something inside her loosened. The weight she carried began to lift, if only slightly. She drank, more than she intended, letting the warmth blur the edges of her sorrow. The bar was loud, crowded with strangers and flickering neon. She didn't remember how the conversation with the bartender started, or why she kept returning to the counter. He was young, easygoing, and listened without judgment. At some point, their casual glances turned into lingering looks. Then a hand on her back. Then a whispered invitation. She followed him to a small apartment above the bar, the details lost in a haze of liquor and loneliness. The night passed in fragments, dizzying moments of touch, a bed too small, the sound of rain against the windows. When she woke the next morning, sunlight spilled across unfamiliar sheets. Her head pounded. Her stomach turned. She sat up slowly, realizing where she was, what she had done. The bartender was still asleep, his back turned. She gathered her clothes in silence, heart racing, and slipped out without a word. The walk back to her car felt like an eternity. At home, she stood under the shower for almost an hour, scrubbing her skin until it burned, trying to wash away the shame. But the memory lingered, vivid and unrelenting. Days passed. Vanessa avoided mirrors. She cleaned the house with obsessive focus, as if restoring order could erase what had happened. She told herself it was a mistake, a lapse, something to bury deep. She wouldn't speak of it. It would never happen again. Then the nausea began. Subtle at first, then insistent. She chalked it up to stress, to guilt, to the emotional strain of the past weeks. But the signs became impossible to ignore. One morning, alone in the bathroom, she held a small plastic stick in shaking hands. 2 pink lines appeared. Clear. Undeniable. At first, her body reacted before her mind could. She laughed, breathless, overwhelmed by a rush of joy and disbelief. She reached for her phone, ready to call Daniel, to tell him the impossible had finally happened. But just as her fingers touched the screen, the truth struck her like a blow. This was not his child. Her hand fell to her side. She stood in the center of the bathroom, the test still clutched tightly, her world spinning. The miracle she had longed for was real. But it was wrapped in betrayal, in a single night she couldn't undo. And now, the life growing inside her was both a blessing and a curse, one that would change everything. The days following the positive test were a blur of silence. Vanessa moved through the house like a ghost, barely touching the floor, her mind consumed by the quiet war inside her. The knowledge of the child growing within her, the one she had longed for, battled against the knowledge of how that child came to be. The walls of the house felt tighter now, as if closing in on her, as if they knew the truth too. She avoided calls from friends, turned off the notifications on her phone, and stopped checking the calendar. Time became meaningless. Meals were forgotten. The television flickered in the background but offered no distraction. She sat on the edge of the guest bed for hours at a time, staring at the pale yellow walls, the soft mobile still hanging above the crib they had never filled. Her hand would rest on her belly without her realizing it, then quickly retreat, as if burned. Her thoughts circled endlessly. She replayed the moment in the bathroom again and again, the hope, the joy, the fall. Each time, her heart would lift, then sink. She considered telling Daniel. She imagined the look in his eyes, the confusion turning to understanding, then betrayal. She imagined his silence, the distance that would grow between them like a canyon. She imagined him leaving, suitcase in hand, never looking back. That image haunted her more than any other. In the early mornings, she would stand at the kitchen sink, watching the sky slowly change color, asking questions no one could answer. Was it fair to bring a child into a lie? Was love enough to forgive herself, if not to be forgiven? Could she destroy what remained of their life together, or could she somehow preserve it? She remembered her 17th birthday, the day her parents died. The flashing lights, the call in the middle of the night, the cold walls of the social worker's office. From that moment forward, she had lived in survival mode. She had worked, studied, scraped her way into adulthood without a safety net. Daniel had been the first person to make her feel safe again, the first person to look at her and see more than tragedy. Losing him now felt unthinkable. One afternoon, she drove to a clinic across town, parking in the back where no one would recognize her. She sat in the car for nearly 40 minutes, engine running, eyes fixed on the entrance. A woman with a small child walked in. A teenager walked out alone. Vanessa gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She had made an appointment, told herself it was the only way to fix what had gone wrong. But her body refused to move. She couldn't do it. The thought of ending the pregnancy twisted something deep inside her. It wasn't just guilt. It was a grief she hadn't expected. After everything, the disappointment, the waiting, the loss, this child was real. This child was hers. She had dreamed of becoming a mother for so long that the idea of choosing otherwise felt like betrayal. Not of Daniel, but of herself. That night, she lay awake in bed, her back to Daniel's empty side. The sheets were cool where his body should have been. She closed her eyes and imagined the baby's heartbeat, tiny and steady, somewhere beneath her ribs. She whispered to the ceiling, to no one, that she would find a way. Somehow. She would protect this child, no matter what it cost. And in that quiet, painful decision, something within her hardened. Not in anger, but in resolve. There would be no confession, no unraveling of their life. There would be silence. There would be a plan. And above all else, there would be a child. When Daniel returned from his latest assignment, Vanessa welcomed him with the same practiced warmth she had always shown. Her growing belly was concealed beneath flowing sweaters and well-placed throw pillows, and she timed her movements carefully, never turning too sharply, never letting him see her undress. She had learned to live in stillness, masking every change in her body with precision. Her voice remained steady. Her smile unchanged. The weeks passed in this delicate balance of illusion and control. At night, she listened to the steady rhythm of Daniel's breathing and pressed her hand gently against her stomach, feeling the life stir within her. Each movement filled her with both joy and dread. She knew the time was running short. The due date loomed closer with every passing day, and with it came the weight of urgency. She could not keep hiding forever. But she wasn't ready to lose everything. Not yet. Once Daniel was airborne again, on another cross-country flight that would keep him away for nearly 3 weeks, Vanessa began preparing the only solution she could imagine. She descended into the basement with a flashlight and a notebook, inspecting every corner of the cold cement space. It had always been just a storage area, a place for tools, boxes of holiday decorations, forgotten furniture. Now, it had to become something else entirely. A secret room. A nursery hidden beneath the house. She cleared the space over several days, hauling old furniture out the back door under the cover of night. She scrubbed the floor with bleach, painted the walls in soft pastel colors, and installed thick insulation to muffle sound. The single window near the ceiling was bricked over and sealed. She added a space heater, a crib, a rocking chair, and shelves for baby supplies. Every item was ordered online using a private Dropbox address she had rented 2 towns over. The packages arrived in plain boxes, and she brought them home slowly, blending them with grocery bags or hiding them in her trunk until no one was watching. Vanessa operated with the precision of someone building a second life. She mapped out feeding schedules, blackout routines, and emergency plans. She added locks to the basement door, installed a sound monitor with a mute function, and practiced descending the stairs silently while holding a bundled blanket to simulate weight. She grew more efficient, more confident, more detached from the idea of asking for help. The day labor began, she drove 3 hours to a private clinic in a neighboring city under a false name. The labor was long but uneventful. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy with dark eyes and quiet breath. When the nurse handed him to her, she felt the world collapse into a single, fragile moment. She held him close, memorizing the shape of his fingers, the way his chest rose and fell. Then, after less than 24 hours, she wrapped him in a gray blanket, tucked him into a carrier, and drove home before dawn. Inside the house, the lights were off. The air was still. Vanessa carried the baby through the kitchen, down the stairs, and into the basement. The crib waited for him, already made with soft sheets and a stuffed bear resting in the corner. She laid him down gently and sat beside the crib, staring at the child she had fought so hard to keep. The room was quiet, dim, sealed from the world above. In the days that followed, she resumed her role as the attentive wife. She sent Daniel photos of the garden, cooked his favorite meals, and spoke to him on the phone with practiced ease. Meanwhile, the life below the floorboards began its own quiet rhythm. Feedings at dawn, lullabies whispered into the dark, diapers changed in shadows. She moved between floors like a ghost, belonging fully to neither world. The child rarely cried. He seemed to sense the stakes of his existence. His eyes followed her movements with eerie stillness, and he never reached toward the stairwell. Vanessa read to him, taught him colors, whispered stories about stars and clouds he had never seen. She explained that his world was different, that silence was safety, that waiting was love. She believed it, even as she watched him grow taller in a place without windows. Life above remained unchanged. Visitors were rare, and Vanessa kept conversations short. No one questioned her absences. Daniel, as always, trusted her. And the house, split into two lives, held its secret tightly. From the outside, the Rives household remained unchanged. The lawn was trimmed, the porch light still flicked on at sunset, and the curtains opened and closed with the sun's rhythm. Neighbors waved to Vanessa as she took out the trash or collected the mail, and she returned their smiles with the same calm she had always displayed. No one suspected that beneath their feet, in a sealed and soundproof basement, a child was living a life known only to her. When Daniel was home, the house functioned as it always had. Vanessa cooked his favorite meals, laughed at his stories from the air, and curled up beside him on the couch with practiced ease. She matched his pace, asked him about routes and aircraft maintenance, listened intently as though nothing in their lives had shifted. Her body had returned to its pre-pregnancy shape quickly, a result of deliberate effort and quiet desperation. She wore sweaters, dimmed the lights, and never allowed herself to be caught off guard. Daniel remained blissfully unaware. At night, while he slept, Vanessa descended the stairs barefoot and silent. The basement nursery was a hidden sanctuary, quiet, clean, and dimly lit by a single lamp. The boy, now several months old, slept soundly in his crib, barely stirring at her approach. She had trained him carefully. Feedings happened without noise. Games were quiet. Songs were sung just above a whisper. Even his cries were short and restrained, shaped by the patterns of silence she had instilled from the very beginning. When Daniel was away, the routine shifted. Vanessa spent nearly every waking hour in the basement. She brought down blankets and pillows, toys, flashcards, soft books. She taught the boy words and expressions using gestures and murmured repetition. She held him close when he reached out, danced with him when music played faintly from a hidden speaker. The two of them existed in a private world, bound together by necessity and a secret that never left the walls. Upstairs, the house remained pristine. Dishes were washed, furniture dusted, grocery lists made. Vanessa moved between floors like clockwork, always aware of the time, always anticipating Daniel's return. She had perfected the rhythm of two lives, one built on performance, the other on concealment. As the boy grew older, his awareness expanded. He pointed toward the ceiling, curious about the sounds above, footsteps, water running, doors opening and closing. Vanessa explained carefully, in the only way she knew how, that the world upstairs was not for him. She told him stories of the sky and trees, of animals and places he could not yet see. She painted his world with her words, filling it with wonder to make the confinement bearable. He listened with wide eyes and accepted her answers. He had known nothing else. She reinforced rules. No walking up the stairs. No touching the door handle. No noise unless she was present. It was a routine he never questioned. Vanessa believed that as long as he was safe and loved, it was enough. She told herself this every night as she lay in bed beside Daniel, her mind still in the basement, listening through the monitor for any sound that might escape. For 5 years, this fragile balance held. Vanessa lived between two identities, the devoted wife above and the secret mother below. She learned how to hide exhaustion beneath makeup, how to lie with steady eyes, how to build an ordinary life on a foundation of deception. The boy, hidden from the world, learned to exist without sunlight or fresh air, without the touch of anyone but her. But perfection has a limit. A routine, no matter how carefully constructed, can be shattered by the smallest mistake. Vanessa did everything she could to keep the illusion alive, to hold both of her worlds in place. Yet with every passing day, the walls between those worlds thinned, and the silence she depended on grew heavier. The house, once her sanctuary, now held its breath, waiting for the moment everything would change. It happened on a quiet Thursday evening in late spring. Daniel had returned home a day earlier than expected, his flight rerouted due to weather delays. Vanessa welcomed him with a warm meal, hiding the flicker of panic behind her smile. She had grown used to having time to prepare, to shift the house back into its orderly routine, to erase all traces of the life below. But this time, she had only hours. Everything appeared normal. They ate dinner in the softly lit kitchen, discussed mundane things, and moved through the house as if nothing unusual lay beneath their feet. Vanessa followed her practiced script, masking the tension in her shoulders, keeping her voice light. When they finally went to bed, she waited until his breathing slowed, until the room settled into the stillness of sleep. Then she slipped out from under the covers and padded toward the basement. She left the door slightly ajar. Downstairs, the boy waited, awake but calm. He had learned not to call out, not to cry unless she was near. She rocked him gently in the chair, fed him, changed his clothes, whispered stories of the stars. Time passed unnoticed. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Daniel stirred. The house was dark. He sat up, disoriented, and heard something, a sound soft but unmistakable. A child's whimper, distant yet present, drifting up from beneath the floor. He listened again. There it was, faint but clear, a muffled, uncertain cry. Confused, he stood and walked toward the hallway. The noise seemed to come from the basement. He called for Vanessa, but received no answer. Vanessa, startled by the sound of his voice echoing from above, panicked. She placed the child in his crib and rushed up the stairs, heart pounding. She found Daniel standing in the hallway, his face clouded with confusion. She deflected, pointed toward the neighbor's house, suggested their grandchildren were visiting. He didn't push further. That night, neither of them slept deeply. 2 days later, in the early hours of morning, the house was silent. Vanessa, believing Daniel to be asleep, descended again into the basement. She left the door unlatched. The boy, older now, more curious, watched the door with wide eyes. Minutes passed. Upstairs, Daniel stirred once more. He rose to get a glass of water, shuffling quietly toward the kitchen. In the hallway, he paused. A shape moved in the shadows. At the end of the corridor stood a small boy. Barefoot, in mismatched pajamas, his hair tousled, his expression still and unreadable. They stared at one another in silence. The boy said nothing. Daniel stepped forward, frozen in disbelief, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. Then Vanessa's footsteps echoed up the stairs. She saw Daniel first, his face pale, his hand trembling at his side. Then she saw the boy. And in that moment, she understood it was over. Daniel did not speak. He turned away and walked to the living room. The boy followed Vanessa back down the stairs, instinctively, like a bird returning to the only nest he had ever known. Hours later, Vanessa sat on the couch, unmoving, waiting for what she knew would come next. The police arrived before noon. The house was searched. The basement uncovered. Records pieced together. There were no legal documents, no birth certificate, no witnesses. Only a hidden room, a child raised in silence, and a woman who no longer had any explanations left to give. Daniel never returned to the house. He packed his things, left the city, and disappeared into a different life. Vanessa was charged and later convicted. The trial was short. The media painted her as a woman unhinged, selfish, deluded. No one understood the full truth. Few even cared to ask. The boy was placed into foster care. For weeks, he asked when his mother would return, when he could go home. No one answered. He was given a new name, a new room, a window with sunlight he didn't understand. The house on the outskirts of Spokane stood empty. The grass grew tall. The shutters curled at the corners. The basement door was sealed, but the memory of the life it held remained, echoing through the silence. A single sound had changed everything.